Story 1. The mask that wasn't a costume. Halloween in Maple Hollow was always a noisy celebration. Children darted between houses with plastic pumpkins in hand, and porch lights glowed in a warm rhythm down the suburban streets. The smell of burning jack-o'-lantern candles mingled with the crisp scent of fallen leaves. Liam, Sarah, and their two friends, Chris and Megan, were too old for trick-or-treating, but too young to give it up entirely. They had compromised: dress up, walk the streets, grab some candy, but mostly hang out and soak in the night. Around 8, while moving from one street to another, Sarah nudged Liam. See him. A figure stood across the street, apart from the clusters of families. He wore a hooded cloak and a mask that looked disturbingly real. The mask resembled a human face, pale and wrinkled, with stitched seams stretching from the corners of the mouth to the jaw. The eye holes were too dark, too deep, as if they tunneled inward. Creepy, but good costume. Chris laughed. Better than anything I've seen tonight. The figure just stood still, head tilted. The group kept walking. They assumed he was just another Halloween enthusiast trying to freak people out. But 20 minutes later, when they turned onto Birchwood Lane, there he was again, standing at the corner, motionless, mask glinting faintly in the streetlight. Megan frowned. How did he? We came from the other direction. Shortcut, Liam said, though unease gnawed at him. He's just messing with people. They continued, but their conversation dulled. The sound of laughter and distant shouts filled the air, but behind them, the soft crunch of footsteps followed. At one house, while Sarah dug through her candy hole, Liam glanced back. The figure stood half a block away, staring, not moving, just watching. Okay, that's not funny anymore, Liam muttered. Chris grinned, trying to shake the tension. Dude's committed. I respect it, but Sarah wasn't laughing. He's been tailing us since we saw him. That's not normal. They quickened their pace, weaving between families, hoping the crowd would break the stranger's focus. For a while, it seemed to work. When they turned onto Pine Street, he was gone. Relieved, they lingered near a decorated yard, sipping cider from a neighbor's stand. The tension ebbed, and laughter returned. Then Sarah froze, eyes widening. Across the street, under the flicker of a broken street lamp, the masked figure stood again. This time, he raised a hand and waved slowly, deliberately. Megan dropped her cup. Okay, we need to go. They abandoned the cider and hurried toward Liam's house, only 4 blocks away. The streets grew quieter. Families were heading home. The sound of their sneakers on pavement echoed sharply now, and every few steps Liam risked a glance back. The figure followed, always the same distance behind, never rushing, just following. By the time they reached Liam's block, Megan was near tears. Chris tried to call it a prank, but his voice wavered. He's probably some older kid. He'll get bored. Yet when they reached Liam's driveway and bolted inside, the figure stopped at the edge of the yard. He didn't cross, didn't chase. He just stood there, watching. From Liam's living room window, they peered out. His parents were still at a party across town, leaving them alone. The figure stood perfectly still at the curb. This is insane, Sarah whispered. Should we call the cops? Liam picked up the phone, but before dialing, he froze. Headlights passed down the street. When they illuminated the figure, the mask gleamed wetly, as though made of stretched, oily skin rather than rubber. The stitched mouth glistened red. The figure tilted his head back, revealing more of the mask. For a brief second, Liam swore he saw human teeth inside, real and yellowed. He slammed the curtains shut. That's not a mask. The group argued, should they call the police? Hide. Confront him. Chris, always the bravest, grabbed a flashlight. I'll prove it's just some creep in a mask. No, Sarah hissed. But Chris was already stepping outside. The others crowded at the window, watching as he marched down the driveway. The figure didn't move. Chris shined the flashlight directly into the face, and screamed. The beam caught on the mask, but it wasn't rubber. It was raw skin, stitched crudely at the edges, sagging unnaturally. One eye was human, bloodshot and twitching, while the other was a hollow socket. Chris dropped the flashlight and bolted back inside, slamming the door. His face was white, his hands shaking. That's not a mask. It's real. It's his face. They scrambled upstairs, hiding in Liam's room. From the window they could still see him standing there, patient, unblinking. Hours passed. The children's laughter faded into silence. Porch lights clicked off one by one. At midnight, the figure finally moved. Slowly, he turned and walked away, vanishing into the shadows of the neighborhood. The friends didn't sleep. When dawn came, Liam's parents returned, furious about the chaos in the house. The police were called, but by then, the figure was long gone. They filed a report, but the officer's skeptical tone said it all. He thought it was just kids spooking themselves. But that afternoon, a news alert came across the TV. Escaped convict still at large. Authorities warn residents to stay inside. Subject believed to be extremely dangerous. Known to mutilate victims and wear their skin as disguises. The photo on the screen showed the very same stitched face they had seen. The group sat in silence, dread curling in their stomachs, because the report didn't just describe the killer, it said he had taken a new victim only last night, a teenager, male, and Chris hadn't been answering his phone since that morning. Story 2. The haunted candy Halloween night in Crestfield always carried an electric buzz. Porch lights twinkled, carved pumpkins flickered, and children darted from house to house with pillowcases stretched full of sugar. Parents trailed behind, chatting, while the younger ones squealed over every chocolate bar and lollipop. 8-year-old Daniel Jenkins loved Halloween more than Christmas. Dressed as a skeleton with glow-in-the-dark bones, he sprinted ahead of his parents, waving his plastic pumpkin bucket like a trophy. But when the group turned down Alder Lane, Daniel froze. At the very end of the cul-de-sac stood a house that looked abandoned. Paint peeled from its siding, windows sagged inward, and the porch light buzzed faintly. Most kids skipped it altogether. Daniel's mother frowned. Not that one, honey. Let's stick to the decorated houses. But Daniel grinned, emboldened by the challenge. It's Halloween. You're supposed to go to the creepy houses. Before his parents could stop him, he sprinted up the cracked walkway and knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open. A figure loomed in the darkness, inside a frail old woman with sunken eyes. Her smile stretched unnaturally wide, revealing teeth yellow as candle wax. "You want candy, don't you?" she rasped. Daniel hesitated, but his curiosity burned brighter than his fear. He nodded. The woman's bony hand extended, dropping a single piece of candy into his bucket. It was unlike anything he had seen. Wrapped in faded black paper with crimson symbols scrawled across it. No brand, no shiny packaging, just strange markings. "Thank you," Daniel muttered, and hurried back down the steps. His mother frowned. "Where did that come from?" Daniel shrugged. "She gave it to me." They tried to forget about it, moving on to brighter houses with friendlier faces. Soon, Daniel's bucket overflowed, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the black-wrapped candy. Later that night, after they returned home, Daniel sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, sorting his haul. His parents told him not to eat too much before bed, but the black-wrapped candy seemed to whisper at him, daring him to try it. He tore the wrapper open. Inside was a small, chalky piece of candy, blood red in color. He popped it into his mouth. It melted instantly. The taste was bitter, metallic, like rust. He gagged, but then a wave of warmth spread through his chest, and his vision blurred. The first vision came quickly. He saw children, dozens of them, lined up inside a dark room, their eyes hollow, faces pale. They opened their mouths in unison, chanting words in a language he didn't know. Behind them, a shadow figure with horns towered, its hand dripping with blood. Daniel spat the candy out, coughing, but the vision didn't fade. The shadowed figure turned its head slowly, as if noticing him. He screamed. His parents rushed upstairs, finding him trembling, candy spit on the carpet. "Just a bad dream," his father said, even though Daniel swore he hadn't been asleep. That night Daniel dreamt of the same children, whispering his name in unison. The following days grew worse. Every time he ate a piece of candy, Snickers, Reese's, even plain lollipops, the visions returned. He saw the old house, the haunted shadow, and the children's pale faces chanting. At school, he grew pale and withdrawn. His teacher scolded him for staring blankly at the wall. But in truth, Daniel wasn't daydreaming. He was seeing the cult again. Their whispers grew louder. "Join us. Join us." Terrified, Daniel's mother took him to the doctor, who dismissed it as a sugar overload and stress. But the boy's eyes told a different story, dark circles beneath them, pupils dilated with fear. By Halloween week's end, Daniel refused to eat anything at all, not because he wasn't hungry, but because even food reminded him of the cursed candy. His parents finally returned to Alder Lane, hoping to confront the woman in the decrepit house. But when they arrived, the property was empty, boarded up, dust thick on the porch. A neighbor swore the house had been abandoned for over 20 years. "Impossible," Daniel's mother whispered. "He got candy from her. I saw it." But Daniel's father said nothing, only tightened his grip on his wife's hand. On Halloween night, exactly 1 week after Daniel had eaten the candy, he woke to chanting outside his window. Shivering, he pulled the curtain back. In the yard below, dozens of children stood in a circle, holding hands, faces pale and hollow. They chanted his name in low, droning unison. In the center of the circle burned a jack-o'-lantern with black fire spilling from its mouth. Daniel screamed for his parents, but they didn't wake. He shook them, but their bodies lay stiff, as though paralyzed. The chanting outside grew louder, vibrating through the walls. He stumbled back to his room, only to find the black-wrapped candy sitting on his desk. Even though he had spit it out days ago, the wrapper was whole again. The red symbols glowed faintly. This time, the candy didn't whisper, it commanded. Eat and join. Daniel tried to throw it out the window, but when it hit the ground, it dissolved into smoke. The chanting rose into a deafening roar. The last thing he saw was the horned figure from his visions rising behind the children, its shadow towering over the house. Its voice slithered into his ears. You are ours now. Then darkness swallowed him. The next morning, Daniel's parents awoke on the living room floor, confused and sick. When they rushed to check his room, it was empty. His bed, untouched. His bucket of candy, gone. Police combed the town for days, volunteers searching woods and rivers, but there was no trace of Daniel Jenkins. Weeks later, on a cold November evening, a neighbor walking his dog swore he saw children standing in a circle at the edge of Alder Lane. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, and in the middle of them was a new child, dressed as a skeleton, his glow-in-the-dark bones shining faintly in the dark. Story 3. The Jack-o'-lantern Man. The Miller family lived on the edge of Pine Creek, in a quiet stretch of farmland where the closest neighbor was a mile away. Every Halloween, they decorated their porch with jack-o'-lanterns, 3 carved by the kids, 1 by their father. The tradition stretched back generations, and the Millers took pride in it. That year, October had been unusually cold. Frost clung to the fields, and the sky carried a pale, steel-gray hue. Still, the Millers gathered on their porch a few nights before Halloween to carve their pumpkins. Mine's scarier, 9-year-old Emily bragged, holding up her lopsided grin of jagged teeth. Mine's funnier, said her brother Jacob, 11, showing off crooked square eyes. Their father, Tom, chuckled, finishing his classic triangular-eyed pumpkin. Together, they placed them on the porch railing, candles glowing warmly. The next morning, something strange waited for them. A 4th pumpkin sat on the porch. It was larger than the rest, its skin dark and glossy like wet leather. Its carved face wasn't playful or jagged, but cruel. Its eyes slanted downward in a furious glare, and its mouth stretched wide, filled with needle-like teeth. Tom frowned. Did one of you carve this last night? The kids shook their heads. Their mother, Hannah, swore she hadn't touched it. Probably a prank, Tom muttered. Teenagers from town. He went to pick it up, but the pumpkin was heavy. Too heavy. Its surface was oddly warm, as though it had been sitting by a fire. Reluctantly, he set it back down. Creepy, Jacob said, grinning nervously. They left it there, assuming some neighbor kid was having fun. But that night, when Tom blew out the candles in their pumpkins, the strange 4th one kept burning. Its flicker glowed a deep, unnatural orange. Over the next few days, unsettling things began to happen. Emily swore she saw the pumpkin shift on the porch just a little, as if it had turned to face her. Jacob teased her, until he saw it too. The family dog, Baxter, barked constantly at the pumpkin, fur bristling, teeth bent. One morning they found him whimpering in the barn, refusing to come near the house. By Halloween night, tension hung thick in the Miller household. Still, Tom brushed it off. It's just a pumpkin, he told his family. Nothing to be scared of. But when the sun set and the first trick-or-treaters came trudging down the rural road, the Miller house felt different. The jack-o'-lanterns glowed warmly on the porch except for the 4th one. Its light burned hotter, almost red, and smoke curled faintly from its toothy grin. Around 8 o'clock, Emily screamed. She had gone to grab her candy bucket from the porch when she froze. The 4th pumpkin wasn't on the railing anymore. It sat on the ground, directly in front of the door, and it was bigger. Its grin stretched wider, sharper, almost alive. Tom, Hannah whispered, clutching her children. It's not a prank, look at it. Before Tom could respond, a crack split the air. The pumpkin's shell fractured, spilling glowing pulp onto the porch. From within, something shifted, something trying to get out. The family stumbled back as the pumpkin split wide open. A figure emerged, tall and crooked, with limbs like blackened wood. Its head was the pumpkin itself, glowing fiercely from within, jagged grins stretching impossibly wide. The jack-o'-lantern man straightened, towering over them, pumpkin eyes burning like coals. Run, Tom shouted. They bolted inside, slamming the door. The house shook as heavy footsteps thudded on the porch. Glass rattled in the windows. Baxter barked furiously from the barn, then yelped suddenly. The sound cut short. The Millers huddled in the living room, hearts pounding. Through the curtains, Emily saw the figure step into the yard, flames licking from its carved mouth. It moved slowly, scanning the fields like a predator. For hours, the Millers waited, too afraid to move. The footsteps circled the house, stopping occasionally at the windows. Once, Hannah swore she heard a low chuckle, a hollow, crackling sound, like fire catching wood. Finally, near dawn, silence fell. When Tom crept to the porch, the figure was gone, but the jack-o'-lanterns were smashed, their pieces scattered across the yard. All except one. The fourth pumpkin sat perfectly intact on the railing, its grin even sharper than before. The Millers considered leaving, but farm life tied them down. Days passed without incident, though the family grew uneasy, always watching the porch. Then, 1 week later, a fire broke out. It started in the barn, consuming the hay bales in minutes. By the time Tom rushed outside with water, the flames had spread toward the house. Amid the smoke, he saw the jack-o'-lantern man striding through the fire, head glowing brighter than the blaze itself. Tom dropped the bucket, grabbed his children, and screamed for Hannah to run. They bolted into the woods, smoke choking their lungs, while behind them, the farmhouse roared with fire. Neighbors arrived hours later to find nothing but ashes. The barn was gone, the farmhouse was gone, and in the middle of the blackened ruins sat a single jack-o'-lantern, untouched by flame. Its grin glowed faintly, smoke curling from its teeth. The Millers were never found. Some say they fled Crestfield, too terrified to stay. Others whisper the jack-o'-lantern man took them, burned their bodies, carved their souls into new pumpkins to join his eternal collection. And every Halloween since, travelers passing through Pine Creek report the same story. On the edge of the charred Miller property, a single pumpkin always appears, bigger each year, grinning wider, waiting for the next family foolish enough to carve beside it. Story 4. The last trick-or-treater, Harold and Margaret Willis, were a quiet couple in their late 60s, the sort who preferred peaceful evenings to holiday chaos. They never had children of their own, but every Halloween they filled a big bowl with candy and sat by the door, handing treats to kids until the crowds thinned. By 11, their suburban street had fallen mostly silent. Porch lights clicked off, and only a few stragglers in costume hurried home. Harold stretched and reached for the candy bowl, nearly empty. "Well, that's about it," he said. "Not bad for another year." Margaret smiled, brushing crumbs of caramel off her sweater. "We'll finish the last few pieces ourselves." But just as she stood to turn off the porch light, a knock came at the door. Knock, knock, knock. The couple exchanged puzzled glances. "It's almost midnight," Harold muttered. "Who'd be out this late?" Still, he opened the door. A small child stood on the porch, dressed in a plain black robe with a hood. The figure held out a plastic pumpkin pail. "Trick or treat," the child said softly. Something about the voice unsettled Harold. It was flat, almost mechanical. The child's face was pale, nearly white, with deep black eyes that reflected no light. Margaret forced a smile. "Well, aren't you spooky? Here you go." She dropped the last candy into the pail, but the child didn't leave. It just stood there, staring up at them. "All right, off you go," Harold said, trying to sound cheerful. "Getting late." The child tilted its head, expression unchanged. "Trick or treat. You've already had your candy," Harold replied, frowning. The child's mouth twitched into the faintest smile. Then, trick. Before they could respond, the porch light flickered and went out. The hallway lamps inside sputtered, plunging the house into shadows. Margaret gasped. "Power surge," Harold muttered, though his voice trembled. He turned back toward the porch, but the child was gone, or so he thought. From the window beside the door, Margaret screamed. The child now stood at the end of their driveway, still facing the house. The Willises locked the door and retreated into the living room. The house felt wrong, too still, too cold. Harold tried the phone, but the line was dead. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, pacing. "Some teenager with a creepy costume." But Margaret shook her head. "Those eyes, Harold, that wasn't a mask." He wanted to argue, but his words caught in his throat when a knock rattled the back door. "Knock, knock, knock." Margaret whimpered. "It's at the back." They crept into the kitchen, Harold gripping a flashlight. Through the glass of the back door, they saw the same child staring in pumpkin pail dangling from its hand. How did it get back here?" Harold stammered. Margaret backed away. "Don't open it. Please, don't." The child tilted its head again. Then it raised its free hand and knocked on the glass once more. Knock, knock, knock. Suddenly, a second knock echoed from the front door. Then another at the side window. The couple spun around. More figures stood outside, now identical children, all dressed in black robes, each holding a pumpkin pail. Their pale faces and hollow eyes pressed against the glass. There's more of them, Margaret whispered, her voice cracking. Within minutes, the house was surrounded. From every window, the children stared in silently, knocking in rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. The sound grew unbearable, echoing through the house like a heartbeat. Harold grabbed the cordless phone again, desperately dialing. Nothing but static. The lights flickered, buzzing faintly. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. The children began to chant, soft and unison, their voices carrying through the glass, though their mouths barely moved. Trick or treat, trick or treat. Margaret clutched Harold's arm. We can't stay here. We have to run. But where? The couple huddled together, waiting for the noise to stop. After what felt like hours, the chanting faded. The knocking ceased. Cautiously, Harold peeked through the curtains. The yard was empty. The driveway, too. The children were gone. See, he whispered, they're gone. Just a nightmare. Margaret didn't answer. She sat stiffly in the chair, her eyes wide and glassy. Margaret, Harold asked, shaking her shoulder. Slowly, her head turned toward him. Her eyes had gone black, pupils stretching until they filled the sockets. Her mouth opened in a smile far too wide for her face. Trick or treat, she whispered. Harold staggered back. Before he could move, the front door creaked open. The children filed inside, one by one, silent and orderly. Their pale faces glowed faintly in the dark. They gathered around Harold, circling him with their pumpkin pails. The last thing he saw before the lights went out completely was Margaret, rising to join them, her face now pale and hollow, her voice blending with theirs. Trick or treat, trick or treat, trick or treat. The next morning, neighbors noticed de Willis' house unusually quiet. The curtains were drawn, the porch light still burning. When police checked inside, they found the house empty, no sign of Harold or Margaret. The only clue was the candy bowl on the table, overturned, wrappers scattered like autumn leaves. And on the porch sat 2 plastic pumpkin pails, filled to the brim with fresh candy. Story 5. The party that never ended. The old Darrow mansion had loomed on the edge of town for nearly a century. Its windows were dark, its porch sagging, and ivy clawed up the crumbling brick walls. Parents warned children to stay away, claiming the place was cursed after a fire in the 1920s, killed dozens of party guests during a Halloween masquerade. Since then, no one lived there, though people swore strange music still floated from its broken windows on October nights. For 5 teenagers, Ava, Marcus, Tyler, Jenna, and Sam, the mansion was irresistible. It was Halloween, they were restless, and they wanted something scarier than handing out candy. Tyler had the idea first. Let's crash the Darrow place, he said with a grin. What's the worst that could happen? They carried flashlights and dared each other across the weed-choked yard. The iron gates groaned as they pushed through, and the air seemed colder as they neared the house. Inside, the air was thick with dust, their beams catching cobwebs draped across chandeliers. The grand entryway yawned before them, marble floor cracked and blackened with age. Then they heard it faint, like a gramophone playing somewhere deep within. Music. Swing music. Do you guys hear that? Ava whispered. Marcus frowned. That's impossible. Yet the music grew louder as they crept toward the ballroom, and when they opened the heavy oak doors, the sight that greeted them froze them in place. The ballroom was alive. Dozens of men and women in glittering 1920s costumes danced across the floor. Masks of feathers and lace covered their faces. Laughter and chatter filled the room. Candles glowed in crystal chandeliers, the light bouncing off polished marble that looked nothing like the decay outside. This can't be real, Jenna breathed. A waiter carrying a silver tray brushed past them. He didn't even glance at the teens. None of the guests did. It was as if they weren't there. Maybe it's a reenactment, Sam offered weakly, but his voice trembled. Yet something was wrong. The music was slightly warped, as though played underwater. The guests' movements, though elegant, seemed jerky, marionette-like. Despite fear prickling their skin, curiosity pulled them in. They wandered among the dancers, invisible, their footsteps lost beneath the music. At the refreshment table, glasses of champagne shimmered golden. Tyler, ever the daredevil, snatched one and lifted it to his lips. Don't, Ava hissed, but he grinned and took a sip. His smile faltered instantly. He gagged, coughing as crimson spilt down his chin. The liquid in the glass wasn't champagne, it was blood. The guests stopped dancing. All at once, every masked face turned toward the teenagers. Ava's stomach dropped. Run. They bolted for the door, but it slammed shut on its own, sealing them in. The guests moved closer, their masks crumbling away to reveal rotting faces, flesh peeling, hollow eyes burning with unnatural light. The ballroom lights flickered, the music distorted into a warped, hellish wail. Tyler collapsed, clutching his throat, blood pouring from his mouth. Jenna screamed, trying to drag him up, but the crowd surged closer, skeletal hands reaching. "This isn't real, this isn't real," Marcus shouted, but his words vanished in the noise. The teens fled deeper into the mansion, twisting through endless corridors. The halls seemed to shift, leading them in circles. Portraits on the walls watched with moving eyes, and doors led back to the same cursed ballroom again and again. Finally, breathless, they stumbled into a parlor. A single figure sat in an armchair, a man in a tuxedo, his face burned and half melted, his lips curled into a smile. "Welcome," he rasped. "The party never ended, and now neither will you." The walls pulsed with heat, smoke seeping in. Ava realized with dawning horror they weren't just seeing the mansion. They were inside the fire of 1923, reliving it. The burned man stood, skeletal fingers extending. "Stay, dance with us, burn with us." Flames roared through the parlor. The teens screamed, clutching each other as the fire consumed everything. Days later, police investigated the Darrow mansion after reports of smoke. They found no fire, no damage, only dust and silence. But in the grand ballroom, 5 new skeletons sat propped against the wall, dressed in tattered 1920s costumes. The legend grew after that. On Halloween night, if you stood outside the Darrow mansion, you might hear faint music. If you dared to enter, you'd see the party still going, the dancers twirling in endless loops, and somewhere in the crowd, 5 modern faces appeared among the masks, forever trapped, forever dancing, in the party that never ended.